Our millionaire uncle died and left a puzzle to his fortune. We went insane solving it. The warehouse it led us to shattered our family forever. My garden gives away its riches to whoever manages to split it. The idea being that if someone figures it out, the whole family gets wealthy. Graham's garden, though. It was a black goat. That's what he used to call the mysterious tech he built, something that made him millions before most people had even heard of crypto. While the rest of us were grinding it out in fields, maxing out credit cards just to stay afloat, he was chilling in a mansion with 7 bedrooms, a wine cellar worth more than most homes, and a garage full of cars that cost more than my yearly salary. When he suddenly passed away at 52 from a heart attack, we assumed his fortune would either disappear into some anonymous charity or get dumped on the family that treated him like a leech for decades. But no, instead his lawyer gathered us all in his office and read a will unlike anything we'd ever heard before. To the family members who only call when they need cash or feel like whining about their miserable lives, it began, "I offer you one chance to prove you're worth more than your list of failures. Break my TK, steal everything I built, but if you fail, you'll watch it all go up in flames," standing there on the sidewalk. Each of us got a fancy envelope, individually sealed, with a cryptic message inside. Where shadows dance but cast no light, where loneliness screams into the night, where memories live but time holds still. That's your clue. Find the key to my final wish. At first, we actually came together, like a real family for once. My wife Priscilla figured it might refer to her old photo darkroom, the one she used to spend hours in developing prints. My cousin Devin guessed it had to be his office. He worked in total darkness for hours at a time, writing code. I was convinced it meant Graham's underground wine cellar, where he stored bottles worth thousands. And Flynn, he thought it was the junkyard covered in white spray paint. We tore through Graham's place for 3 weeks like we were possessed. We moved junk that hadn't been touched in years, looked behind fancy paintings for hidden compartments, yanked up Persian rugs, and clawed at floorboards until our fingers were raw. We checked tight crawl spaces, flipped through every book in his massive library, and even drained the pool to see if there was anything hidden beneath the water. Nothing. Not a single clue. And that's when things started to fall apart, like a rubber band stretched way too far. Priscilla hired a private investigator who billed $750 a day. Devin bribed the old housekeeper $1,000 to spill any secrets about Graham's habits or hiding places. My mom started showing up at the mansion at 5 in the morning, just so she could search in peace, thinking more clearly when no one else was around. Flynn went full paranoia mode and installed hidden cameras all over the place, watching our every move like we were suspects in a crime. Then came the real drama. Priscilla found something she absolutely shouldn't have. It was during her 100th search of Graham's main bedroom. Under his massive antique bed, she discovered a loose floorboard. Beneath it, a metal lockbox filled with old photographs and what looked like a second TK note, this one bearing Graham's signature. But instead of calling us like we'd agreed, she quietly slipped the box into her designer bag and acted like she'd found nothing. Too bad for her. Flynn's hidden cameras caught everything. Crystal clear, high-definition proof. The next morning, he called a family meeting in Graham's kitchen. Priscilla tried to play dumb at first, but Flynn pulled out his laptop and hit play. In less than 30 seconds, her smug face shifted to panic, then guilt, then full-on dread. That's when my mom snapped. She was trembling with rage, and honestly, I didn't blame her. It was only fair. But Priscilla didn't back down. "Possession is 9/10 of the law," she said with a shrug. That was Devin's breaking point. He grabbed his wallet, the same one he'd used to pay the housekeeper, and emptied it right there on the marble floor. Then he slammed the box open. The sound echoed like snapping bones. Photos flew everywhere, torn scraps of paper, Polaroids from places none of us immediately recognized, a small padlock, and one handwritten note that made the blood freeze in my veins. "Only one of you deserves this fortune. The rest of you will get exactly what's coming." It wasn't signed, but I knew Graham's handwriting the second I saw it. Same neat script he used for birthday cards. The ones he used to slip $100 bills into. Always crisp, always clean. A way of saying I care, without having to put in the effort to actually show up. The photos told a quiet story. Memories we hadn't touched in years. Our old family lake house, abandoned after Grandpa passed. The tiny apartment Graham lived in above a pizza joint while teaching himself to code. A photo from a cheap carnival where he used to run the tilt-a-whirl for drunk teenagers during summer break, saving every penny for college. But there was one photo that made Priscilla stop cold. So much so, none of us wanted to look at it. It showed an old warehouse on the edge of town, the one where Grandpa used to take us as kids, the one with the weird wall we used to climb all over like little monkeys. Priscilla shook her head, whispering, "He wouldn't." Her voice cracked, almost silent. "It's okay," she said. But I wasn't sure if she was trying to convince us or herself. Flynn snatched the photo from Priscilla's shaky hands. She looked like she'd seen a ghost. I remembered how Grandpa used to scare us with ghost stories in that old warehouse whenever a thunderstorm rolled in. Graham was seriously freaked out by that place after what happened. He swore on Mom's grave he'd never set foot in it again. Devin picked up the key from the floor and turned it over in his hands, studying the worn surface. "This thing's been used recently," he muttered. "These scratches definitely not just sitting around." The warehouse was exactly 46 minutes out of town. I tracked it on GPS. It's out on 20 acres of basically worthless land that's been in the family for generations. We all piled into a big SUV, Flynn driving like we were little kids again, but the air inside the car was thick. No one said much, except for the occasional left here or go straight. Meanwhile, I noticed Mom glued to her phone, probably texting her new boyfriend Riley about the inheritance and what it might mean for their future wedding. When we finally pulled up, the warehouse looked exactly like I remembered as a kid, rusty and forgotten. The metal siding had faded to a weird chocolate bronze color, the windows were shattered, and the whole place reeked of mold and old rain. It was the kind of smell that stuck to your skin. The only thing different was the new heavy-duty bumper lock on the front door. It looked pricey, definitely a recent addition. The key slid in and turned with a satisfying click. We stepped inside and couldn't believe what we saw. The place had been completely redone. White painted concrete floors, insulated walls with clean new drywall, skylights with sleek hanging lights, and right in the center of the room, an old wooden table with 5 chairs placed in a perfect circle. Sitting on each one was a manila envelope, each labeled with our names in Graham's smooth, familiar handwriting. "Okay, this is officially insane," Flynn whispered, but he was already walking toward his chair, like he couldn't stop himself. I opened mine. Inside was another TK Pang message, but this one felt different. It was more personal, more threatening. "Before your final test, one truth will break your loyalty. Choose the wisdom you value most, or join me as just another ghost with a warning." Behind that note was a confession, one that made my stomach flip and my hands shake so badly I could barely hold a page. Turns out, around 15 years ago, we were just kids, messing around in this warehouse, playing on some weird brick structure when the floor suddenly gave out. Devin, he was only 7, fell straight through and landed hard on some old rusted machinery in the basement. His legs were shattered, bones poking through skin, blood pooling around him fast. The rest of us panicked and ran for help, screaming our heads off. But Graham, just 12 at the time, stayed. He climbed down to that dark basement, tore off his favorite hoodie to make a tourniquet, held pressure on the wound, and kept Devin talking and awake until the paramedics arrived nearly 20 minutes later. The ER doctor later said Devin would have bled out if it weren't for that first aid. But that's not the version of the story we all grew up hearing. Priscilla, who was 13 at the time, and already showing those manipulative traits that shaped her as an adult, told everyone Graham had dared Devin to jump on the weak floor, said he teased him, called him a coward. She was furious that summer. Graham always got the attention. He was smart, funny, magnetic in a way that made adults gravitate toward him. Priscilla was average, in every way. Average looks, average grades, average everything, and it ate her up inside that the younger kids adored Graham. So she made up a story, one where he was the reckless one. She convinced our parents, even coached the little kids on what to say when asked. They believed her, not because she was especially convincing, but because Graham had always questioned authority, never played by the rules. He wasn't a bad kid, just didn't fake it for anyone. That made him a target. And because of that lie, he spent the next 15 years being treated like a danger to his own family, all while he was the one who actually saved Devin's life. I looked around the table at my relatives as they read their own versions of this truth. Devin stared at his envelope, visibly shaken, his jaw clenched, eyes twitching as the memory started surfacing. Mom had gone ghost pale, gripping the back of her chair so hard her knuckles turned white. Flynn looked lost, too young at the time to remember, but old enough to have absorbed the Graham is trouble narrative over the years. Priscilla was crying in silence, mascara running down her cheeks like black ink. And me? I just sat there stunned. I'd always been a little kid in that memory, not old enough to really understand what happened. But now, I saw it all differently. She looked crushed. Her voice gave out, and for a second I couldn't even process what she meant. I had no idea that what happened that day would haunt her for the rest of her life. "You ruined her relationship with our parents," Devin said quietly. There was a rawness in his voice I'd never heard before. "She tried to tell them the truth," he continued, begged them to listen. "But they called her a liar. They chose to believe you instead of finding out what really happened." Then I noticed something, 4 professional-grade security cameras mounted in each corner of the warehouse. The little red lights were blinking steadily in the shadows. We'd been recorded the moment we stepped through the door. Suddenly a deep sound echoed through the space. It was coming from speakers hidden around the building. And then, Graham's voice. It wasn't some old home video. This was a fresh recording, probably made just days before he died. "If you're hearing this," he said, "then you've broken the silence and uncovered the truth about what really happened in this warehouse 15 years ago. Congratulations, you've finally decided to face it, and now you've just confessed your part, on camera, in front of everyone." Priscilla stared directly into the nearest lens, her eyes wide, almost glassy. Her entire performance, so carefully put together, had just shattered in an instant. "Graham, please," she whispered. "I was young, I was jealous and stupid, but I never meant to hurt you." But the recording didn't stop, and Graham's voice only grew colder. "You stole 15 years from me. You stole our parents' trust. You stole the love of my siblings. You robbed me of a normal relationship with the people who should have meant the most. And that lie cost exactly $15 million. At that moment, multiple screens lit up on the warehouse walls, showing legal documents. Priscilla's name was front and center as the primary heir. But there was fine print, and when she read it, her face went pale. The money came with strings. Dear cousin, Graham's voice continued, you have 1 year to publicly admit what you did. Start at our parents' graves. You'll also set up a foundation for kids who've been falsely accused. You'll spend your life trying to make things right. If you fail, even once, every cent goes to charity, and your confession video gets posted on every social media platform that exists. Flynn jerked so hard in his seat that his chair toppled backward, crashing to the floor. This is insane, he blurted out. Priscilla's the liar, not all of us. Why are we getting punished for what she did? The recording kept going. Graham had clearly predicted this reaction. None of you ever asked her, he said. It's been 17 years, and not once did any of you ask Devin what he remembered about that day. You were so quick to believe I was the monster, because it was easier than admitting you might have been wrong. Devin's envelope was different. Inside was a check for $2 million, and a letter that broke him. Tears streamed down his face as he read. Devin, Graham's voice softened, I'm sorry I never had the courage to say this when I was alive, but you deserve to know that someone fought for you that day. You deserve to know that I never regretted going back for you, not for 1 second. I hope this money gives you the healing our family never offered. At the bottom of the envelope was a single heartbreaking line, written on expensive stationery. A mother who doesn't stand up for all her children doesn't deserve wealth or forgiveness. Flynn's envelope was smaller, a $50,000 check, and a short, brutally honest note. You were 5 when this happened. You weren't part of the lie, but now you're 21, old enough to ask questions, old enough to realize that family stories aren't always the truth. This is for college. Learn to think for yourself, especially when someone tells you who the villain is and who the hero's supposed to be. Then came mine, and it floored me. Graham's voice came through the speaker again. My dear niece, you never really believed Priscilla, did you? I swallowed hard. He was right, and the fact that he knew that gave me chills. I was 7 back then, but I remembered the blood on Graham's sleeves and how gently he held Devin while we waited for help. I also remembered how Priscilla's version of the story never quite lined up and she repeated it to different adults. I'd kept that to myself for years, and Graham had seen it. He saw me wrestle with it every holiday, every time someone brought up that day like he was the villain. You even tried to tell your mom when you were 12, Graham continued, but she shut you down, told you not to question Priscilla. Inside my envelope was a legal document. It named me executor of a separate trust, a $3 million fund. Money meant specifically for those who spoke the truth, for people who found their voice too late, but still chose to use it. The camera recording all of this had one last message. Graham's voice, clear and calculated, came through the speakers. This recording will automatically be uploaded to the social media accounts of each family member within the hour. Everyone's real name will be tagged, except for the one person who told the truth about what happened that day. Your confession is about to become public knowledge. Priscilla looked around the table like a trapped animal. Her eyes were wide with panic. I'll tell everyone the truth, she said, almost breathless. I'll post it, on Facebook, on Instagram. I'll call everyone we know. I'll fix this. 17 years too late, Devin replied softly. But something in his voice had shifted. There was forgiveness there, a hint of peace, and then something none of us expected happened. My mom did something I'd never seen her do in my entire life. She owned up to her failure. No, she said quietly, rising from her seat and walking toward the center of the room. I have to take responsibility too. She stood right in front of the largest camera and looked straight into the lens, her posture steadier than I'd ever seen. My name is Rebecca Tan, she said, and I failed my son in the worst way imaginable. When Priscilla told us Graham was responsible for Devin's accident, I believed her. I didn't question it. I didn't ask Graham what happened. I didn't give him a chance to explain. I just assumed he was lying. Her voice cracked, but she kept going. I took the easy route. I chose a version of the story that made one son a hero and the other a danger. I picked comfort over truth, and Graham paid the price for that choice for the rest of his short life. The recording stopped. The cameras shut off with a final mechanical click. And for a few long, heavy minutes, the warehouse was completely silent, except for Priscilla's muffled sobbing echoing across the cold, empty space. Then Flynn laughed, not the funny kind. It was that hollow, bitter laugh you let out when your entire life has just been flipped upside down. So what now? He asked, voice cracking. We all just go back to our sad little lives and pretend this never happened? No, Devin said, standing taller than I'd seen him in years. We do what Graham wanted us to do. We tell the truth, even when it hurts. We stop protecting people who don't deserve it. We become the kind of family he should have had, and we did. 6 months later, Priscilla used her inheritance to launch the Grampton Foundation, an organization for children falsely accused of wrongdoing. They offered legal help and therapy for kids caught in the crossfire of adult lies. Their first big case? A group of teenage boys expelled from school after a jealous classmate made up a story. Priscilla threw herself into the case like her life depended on it. Maybe it did. Devin donated every penny he received to grow the foundation. This won't buy back my relationship with Graham, he said, but maybe it'll stop other families from making the same mistake. He started therapy and began speaking publicly about childhood trauma and how emotional manipulation inside families can leave wounds that last a lifetime. My mom used her savings to build a memorial garden for Graham at the hospital where Devin was treated. She volunteers there now, reading books to kids in the ER and helping families stay calm during emergencies. She says it's her way of making sure no one else feels alone like Graham did. Flynn? He used his college fund to study psychology and criminal justice. He told me he wants to help others wrongly accused, not just in courtrooms, but inside their own homes. His senior thesis? It was all about how one small lie can poison generations. As for me, I kept my share of the legacy, but not for luxury. Graham's final instructions were clear. The money came with a mission. I was to spend my life telling the real story of a broken family that finally learned to be better. I was to speak out loudly about the kind of toxic dynamics that nearly destroyed us. That's why I'm telling you this now, openly, honestly. But the story didn't end there. Just last week, 1 year to the day after Graham died, I got a letter from a law firm in Denver I'd never heard of. It said I was named as a required witness in the will of someone I didn't even know. Turns out, Graham had a stepbrother, a child from our grandfather's first marriage. The man had passed away recently and left behind very specific instructions. His will couldn't be read unless I was in the room. The woman who read it to me was sharp, probably in her 60s, with a steel gaze. She handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in handwriting that looked eerily similar to Graham's. Inside was a photo of Graham and the stepbrother, smiling in front of a strange old building I'd never seen before. On the back, in small pointed writing, some family secrets run deeper than others. Then beneath that, TKTK was never about money. It was always about this. Will your generation choose truth over comfort when it actually matters? Underneath, taped carefully to the envelope, was a map. New Mexico, a remote area, and one more key, aged, yellowed, and smooth from years of use. The woman reading Tobias's will told me that this remote mansion had been silently watching our family fall apart for years. Tobias knew everything. Priscilla's lies, our parents' failures, and the pain Graham carried alone. He left something for you, she said, but only if you're willing to continue what Graham started. Then she added, almost solemnly, Tobias believed some family traditions should be broken, but some deserve to be born. I drove to New Mexico the very next morning, my car packed with camping gear and enough food for a week. The address led me far outside Santa Fe, into a pocket of wilderness surrounded by mountains that seemed to stretch forever. The house was an enormous log cabin, clearly built in the 1920s, with additions tacked on over the decades as the family expanded. The old yellow key slid smoothly into the front door, and I stepped into what felt like a museum dedicated to a family history I'd never seen before. Photos covered the walls, nearly a century's worth, family reunions that happened before I was even born, and images of Graham, scattered throughout different stages of his life. But they weren't the formal portraits we had at home. These were real, snapshots of him laughing, coding at his computer, or talking animatedly with an older man I now knew was Tobias. In the center of the great room stood a wide oak table, polished to a mirror shine. On it sat a leather-bound journal and a handwritten note from Tobias. If you're reading this, then you've chosen truth over comfort when it matters most. He wrote about Graham, how years ago Graham confided in him about the twisted patterns in our family, how he also told him about me, the only one who ever dared to question Priscilla's story. Even as a child, Graham believed I had the strength to break the cycle. I opened the journal, and page after page revealed a family history we were never told. Tobias had documented the dysfunction stretching back generations, showing how secrecy and manipulation were passed down like some kind of genetic curse. Our grandfather, the patriotic storyteller who used to take us on adventures, he was actually an alcoholic who abandoned his first wife and daughter when Tobias was only 3. He later reinvented himself, married our grandmother, and acted like his previous life never existed. That same pattern repeated with our parents. Dad once covered up a car crash in college, letting an innocent classmate take the fall and serve time. Mom stole from her employer to pay off the house, then doctored the books to avoid getting caught. Gramp discovered both secrets as a teenager. Back when he helped Dad fix his old computer, he found hidden files, proof of everything. Police records, court docs, financial logs, medical reports. It was all there. Suddenly, the way our family treated Gramp made perfect sense. He wasn't an outcast because he was troubled or difficult. He was a threat to the web of lies they'd spent their lives protecting. Priscilla's lie about the warehouse gave our parents the perfect excuse to dismiss Gramp forever. If they painted him as dangerous, they could silence him, discredit him, make him the villain, and invalidate everything he might ever reveal. Tobias's journal didn't just have stories, it held evidence, years' worth of legal documents, time-stamped, verified, and sorted like a prosecutor's case file. He had everything. He'd built an airtight case against our parents and grandparents, but he never used it. The final journal entry was raw. "I'm a coward," Tobias wrote. "I could have cleared innocent names. I could have sought justice for the people my family hurt, but I didn't. because facing the truth meant losing the only family I had left, even if that family was built on lies. At the bottom of the page was a phone number. Beside it, a line of instructions. Call this number when you're ready to finish what I couldn't. My hands were shaking as I dialed. A woman picked up on the first ring. Joshua, she said calmly, I've been expecting your call. Her name was Detective Ramirez. She'd worked with Tobias years ago when he first brought in the evidence. She told me Tobias had hoped to give the police context about Gramp, about the family dynamics that led to Priscilla's lies. But by the time he came forward, the statute of limitations had run out. The worst crimes our parents committed, the car crash, the embezzlement, were legally untouchable. The system couldn't punish them anymore. But Detective Ramirez continued, the victims are still alive. The man who was wrongfully convicted for your father's hit-and-run accident is now 63 and lives in Rhode Island. The woman your mother framed in that financial case is 58 and barely scraping by in a small town called Pantijompo. She still can't pay her bills. She gave me their contact information, along with one final request from Tobias. Use your inheritance and the Gramp Foundation to compensate the people our family hurt. That led to the most difficult conversations of my life. Marcus Esparza, the man who served 2 years in prison for the crime my father committed, cried when I called and explained the truth. He had lost his scholarship, his fiancée, and his entire future because of a crime he didn't commit. I've spent 40 years carrying the shame for something your father did, he told me. I always wondered why he was so nice to me after the trial. He visited me twice in prison, brought me a book, told me he was praying for me. I thought he was just a good Christian man trying to help a sinner find redemption, but now I understand. He visited me as a victim, to deal with his own guilt, not because he cared. Lucia Chan, the woman my mother framed, lost her entire career in accounting. She was never able to work in finance again. She drained her savings to pay for legal fees, trying to prove her innocence, and afterward worked minimum wage jobs for the rest of her life because no one would hire someone with a criminal record. Your mother sent me a Christmas card every year for 20 years, Lucia told me. She always wrote a little note saying she was praying for my family and hoped I would find peace. I kept them because I wanted to believe someone still saw me as a good person. She had no idea why her life had fallen apart, and it turns out my mother had been sending Christmas cards to the woman whose life she destroyed. Thanks to Tobias's documentation and the foundation's legal team, we were finally able to make things right. Marcus received enough money to buy a house and secure his retirement. Lucia's criminal record was officially expunged, and she received a settlement that compensated her for 40 years of lost wages and pension. But the hardest part was still ahead. Tobias had left special instructions on how to confront our parents. Both of them were still alive. My father was in the early stages of dementia. My mother lived in a care facility after being hit by a truck. I visited her first. She was sitting in her wheelchair by the window, staring out at the garden, that same blank expression she'd had since the accident. Her speech was limited, but her mind was still sharp enough to understand. I laid the documents on the table in front of her, and I watched her face shift as she recognized her own handwriting on the falsified financial records. She whispered just 2 names, Marcus, Lucia. I explained everything, how Tobias had uncovered it all, how the victims had suffered for decades, how we used the Gramp Foundation to repair the damage. I told her about the Christmas cards, how they reached Lucia, who never even knew why her life had collapsed. That's when my mother began to cry, not like an old woman with regrets, but raw, soul-deep crying. The kind that comes from realizing your whole identity just cracked in half. When I finished, she reached for the notepad next to her, and with a trembling hand, she wrote one sentence. Tell them I'm sorry. I left the facility and went straight to my father's memory care unit. He was in the recreation room, working on a puzzle he had already assembled and taken apart dozens of times without remembering it. I showed him the police report from the hit and run. At first, there was no reaction, but then something flickered in his eyes. A moment of clarity. Marcus was a good boy, he said suddenly. Stronger than I'd heard him in months. He didn't deserve what happened to him. For a few minutes, he remembered it all. He told me about the night of the accident, how he was drunk, coming home from a party, and hit Marcus's bike. He panicked, drove off, then came back a few hours later, pretending to be the one who discovered the scene. I knew he wasn't guilty, he said. I saw them arrest him, and I didn't say a word. I visited him in prison because I thought that if I was kind to him, maybe it would ease my guilt. But then the clarity faded. Within minutes, he was back to rearranging puzzle pieces, unaware of our conversation. Still, I had what I needed. Proof. Confirmation that everything Tobias found was real, and that our parents had knowingly destroyed innocent lives just to save themselves. For the next 6 months, I worked with the legal team to reach out to every person who had ever been harmed by our family. Tobias's journal was filled with references, small incidents that had snowballed into lifelong damage. Colleagues falsely accused and fired, classmates who were bullied until they broke down, neighbors who were isolated and shamed just for questioning our family's version of events. Every conversation felt like surgery on my soul, cutting away pieces of the identity I had built around belonging to a good family. But each call also brought healing to people who had lived with undeserved shame for decades. The most unexpected call came from Priscilla. Her voice was barely audible. I found something in Gramp's house, she said, hidden in the wall of his bedroom. I think you need to see it. I drove to Gramps' estate, the same house Priscilla had slowly been cleaning out as part of her role in the foundation. She led me to his bedroom and pointed to a hidden compartment behind the headboard. Inside was a stack of letters, dozens of them, each addressed to one of us, but none of them had ever been sent. I wrote these over the years, one letter began. Usually when I couldn't sleep. The letter addressed to me started with, I want you to know that I saw you trying to tell the truth when you were 12. I saw how your mother silenced you. I want you to know I knew you believed me, but I didn't speak up because if I had, you might have ended up just like me. Isolated, blamed for something you didn't do. The letters to Devon were packed with medical advice and emotional encouragement Graham had researched but never dared to share. I've followed your physical therapy progress through your mom's Facebook posts, one note read. I found some experimental treatments that might help your chronic pain, but I didn't know how to reach out without causing more drama. The most devastating letters were the ones to our parents. To our mother, he wrote, I forgive you for choosing to believe Priscilla's lies. I understand that facing your mistakes means facing your capacity for poor judgment, but you should know this. Your choice to believe I was dangerous made me believe I was dangerous. I spent 15 years terrified of what I might be capable of, because the people who were supposed to know me best decided I was a threat to children. To our father, I know about the accident, the hit and run, the blackmail with mom's money. Tobias told me everything when I turned 18, and I've spent my adult life wondering, did I inherit your ability to destroy innocent lives, or could I choose something better? I chose differently, but that choice came at a cost. It meant losing my family. The final letter, dated 1 week before his death, was addressed to all of us. I'm dying from a heart condition that might have been treatable if I had a support system, but I was so used to being the family's problem that I ignored the symptoms until it was too late. I don't blame you for my death, but I need you to understand this. Isolation can kill just as surely as any disease. I created TK and the warehouse test, not to punish you, but to give you a choice, to choose truth over comfort. If you're reading this letter, that means you made the right choice. It means the next generation might finally get the chance to grow up healthy. This letter isn't about legacy. It's about building a support system for other children who are accused or rejected, the kind I never had. It's about breaking the cycle of lies and manipulation that's defined our family for 4 generations. Tobias has more information. He was too afraid to share it while alive, so he left it all with you. I love you, truly, because I believe you have the strength to face the truth. Some stories are meant to end. Others are meant to evolve into something better. I love you all, even if I never figured out how to stay in your lives and keep my integrity at the same time. Choose better. For your children. Priscilla and I sat together in that empty room and cried. Not just for Gramps' death, but for the relationship we might have had, if only our family had chosen truth over comfort all those years ago. 2 weeks later, Tobias's lawyer reached out with one final update. Before his death, Tobias had purchased land in New Mexico and had it developed into a residential facility. Not for the elderly, but for people labeled as black sheep, for survivors of family trauma, for those falsely accused and cast out by their own blood. The buildings were already built. They just needed staff and programming. His wish was clear, to name it the Gramp Thornfield Center for Family Justice. The lawyer looked at me and said quietly, he hoped you would consider running it. 6 months ago, I moved to New Mexico. The center officially opened in January. We offer week-long programs for families ready to face the dysfunction, denial, and deceit passed down through generations. We provide therapy. We offer mediation. We fight legally for people trying to restore their names or repair relationships broken by false accusations. Priscilla visits every few months, bringing updates from the foundation and progress reports from the families we've helped. Devon finished his psychology degree and now works on our staff as a trauma counselor. Flynn transferred to the University of New Mexico and helps lead our legal advocacy program. His mother passed away in her sleep last winter. Her final words to the nursing staff were, "Tell Marcus and Louise I'm sorry." We held a small memorial for her and donated her remaining savings to the foundation. Their father's dementia has progressed so far that he no longer recognizes any of us, but according to the staff, he still talks about a boy named Marcus, and he often asks if anyone knows whether he's okay. Then just last month, we got a call from Detective Ramirez. Her voice was urgent. There's been a major breakthrough in Lucia Chan's case, she said. Lucia's former employer had agreed, finally, to issue a public apology. They also offered additional compensation. Why now? Because your foundation's work, she continued, has sparked something. Other companies had started reinvestigating old wrongful terminations, looking for signs of buried injustice. 17 other cases from the same time period surfaced. In every single one, a guilty party had been protected, while innocent employees were fired to cover it up. Your family's tactics, Ramirez said, weren't unique. They were just one part of a larger corporate rot. Today, at 70, Lucia Chan is a proud advocate for our center. She mentors other older adults trying to clear their names after decades of undeserved shame. Marcus Esparza, now 64, started his own scholarship fund, the Second Chance Foundation, for ex-convicts rebuilding their lives. Every year, he visits our center and speaks to new families. The hardest part wasn't prison, he tells them. It was the 40 years after. I always wondered if people could see the record when they looked at me, if I'd ever be treated like I was worthy of basic dignity again. He says that knowing the truth, having it finally acknowledged, healed him more than any settlement ever could. Last week, something unexpected happened. A plain envelope was delivered to our center's front desk. No return address. Inside was a photo of a young woman I didn't recognize. She was standing in front of a house I swore I'd seen before, though I couldn't quite place it. On the back, someone had written, "Graham had a daughter. Her name is Ella. She's 21 now. She spent her life waiting to meet her family and to hear the truth about why her father never came." There was an address in Providence and a phone number. Tomorrow morning, I'm heading to Providence. Because some family stories, they don't end. They just wait for someone brave enough to turn the page. Ella answered the phone on the first ring. "Is this about my father?" she asked before I could even introduce myself. "Yes," I said. "I'm your cousin, and there's a lot I need to tell you. The cycle of secrets ends with me, and what comes next is finally the truth."